The Short-Mayo Composite Aircraft's history begins in the 1930s. By the 1930s, it was well known that aircraft could maintain flight with greater loads than they could take off with. An aircraft's takeoff weight was its limiting factor to how much fuel and cargo it could carry. For Major R.H Mayo, the technical general manager of Imperial Airways, he had a way to overcome this. What if an overloaded aircraft, unable to take off under its own weight, was placed on the back of a bigger aircraft? Then it could essentially be piggybacked up to altitude where it could be released and fly under its own power to its destination. This would allow the aircraft to carry more cargo, while also allowing the aircraft to have a greater range. The Air Ministry seemingly accepted the idea, as Specification 1333 was drawn up to cover the design of such an aircraft. Additionally, it was agreed upon that the cost of the new design would be shared equally between Imperial Airways and the Ministry, while Short brothers were contracted to undertake the building of the aircraft. What emerged was the Short-Mayo Composite Aircraft, an aircraft made up of two components, a large 4-engine seaplane on the bottom and a smaller 4-engine floatplane mounted on top. The lower component, the short S.21 Maia, acted as the carrier aircraft, tasked with lifting the smaller aircraft, known as Mercury, into the air. It is said that the Maia was based off the short Empire flying boats, but it did have a few key differences. To begin with, the Maia had a wing area that was 250 square feet larger than the Empire flying boats. Then, the side of the hull had tumble home, whereas the hulls of the Empire flying boats were vertical. The 4 Bristol Pegasus 10 engines of the Maia were moved further away from the wing root to avoid the upper floats of the Mercury, and the rear of the fuselage was swept up, raising the tailplane in relation to the wing. Finally, on top of the Maia, a pylon structure was added to allow the ability to carry another aircraft. The Maia could carry 18 passengers and flew for the first time on July 27, 1937. The upper component was the short S.20 Mercury, an all-metal floatplane co-designed by Arthur Gouge, Short Brothers chief designer, and R.H Mayo. It was powered by 4 Napier Rapier H engines and measured 51 feet long with a wingspan of 73 feet. Designed to fly at 10,000 feet, the Mercury had a maximum cruising speed of 190 miles per hour, could carry a payload of 1,000 pounds, and was operated by a crew of 2. With Captain John Lancaster Parker at the controls, the first test flight took place on the 5th of September 1937 and lasted for 15 minutes. It was reported that initial testing revealed an aircraft that had better performance than expected. The Mercury was secured to the Maia through a series of 3 locks. The pilot of each aircraft had control over one release lock respectively. Finally, the third lock was an automatic spring-controlled latch, which would automatically unlock once a force of 13,000 newtons was reached. When released, the Maia would naturally drop away, and the Mercury would lift up, allowing the 2 aircraft to safely separate and stay out of each other's way. On January 20th, 1938, the first successful flight with the Mercury attached to the Maia occurred. This was followed shortly thereafter on February 6th with the first successful separation of the 2 mid-flight. More test flights followed before the Short-Mayo Composite Aircraft was ready to attempt a transatlantic crossing. On July 21, 1938, the composite aircraft took off from Southampton, with the Mercury loaded with 600 pounds of cargo, including newspapers, press photos, and movie newsreel, while the Maia had 10 passengers and luggage on board. After takeoff, the 2 aircraft separated over Foynes, Ireland, with the Maia going on to land at Foynes, while the Mercury headed off over the Atlantic. After 20 hours and 21 minutes, the Mercury landed in Montreal, Canada, still with 80 gallons of fuel on board. The other noteworthy flight the composite aircraft would undertake would be its record-breaking flight from Britain to South Africa. To undertake this flight, the Mercury had its floats strengthened and sealed, allowing it to carry extra fuel. On October 6, 1938, the Mercury separated from the Maia over Dundee, Scotland, and began its long trek for South Africa. Fighting severe headwinds and thunderstorms, after being in the air just over 42 hours and covering a distance of 9,652 kilometers, the Mercury landed on Orange River near Alexander Bay, South Africa. This flight set a new international seaplane distance record, a record that remains unbroken to this day. The beginning of World War II ended further experiments and trials with the composite aircraft. The Mercury was transferred to Felixstowe, where it was used by No. 320 Squadron of the Royal Air Force. In August 1940, it was registered to BOAC and stayed here for a year before returning to Short Brothers in August 1941. This is where the Mercury would meet its end, with the machine being broken up and recycled. For the Maia, it lasted until May 1941, where it was destroyed by a German bombing raid while residing in Poole Harbour. Only one Short-Mayo Composite aircraft was built, having a brief career. Mayo's ideas would go no further, as aircraft quickly became bigger and capable of crossing the Atlantic on their own. Yet still, the Short-Mayo Composite aircraft stands as a fascinating and intriguing experiment in aviation history.